Welcome. Today we're going to be discussing the technique Lone Kimono and some relationships between it and other techniques in the American Kenpo system. Now, as we say throughout these videos, keep in mind that this is not intended to be a comprehensive list, far from it, and it's really not family groupings. So what is it? What it is different avenues that you can explore in which you can see how techniques in the Kenpo system are related. So let's start out with Lone Kimono. The general idea here in Lone Kimono is we're controlling dimensions. So that's what this video is going to be concentrating on. So how are we going to control the dimensions on Lone Kimono? So let's start out with the base idea. So what we have here is an applied minor where they're grabbing us. That gives us a fixed point in space. We also have a fairly fixed point space here, which is on their shoulder. And what we have is a loose point here, which is that joint in which they're going to be using to potentially use against us. So what we want to be able to do is isolate it or control that dimension. In this case, the dimension of depth. And the way we're going to do this is by getting that upper hand to make sure that that stays fixed and then applying pressure to that joint so that they cannot bend it, so that therefore we're controlling that depth zone. Okay? So we can then apply this to a different technique, something like a snapping twig. But this brings in some different changes. The thing to think about here is we no longer have this fixed point because it's an in-flight minor, not an applied minor. So what do we have to do? We then have to create that third point here with our left hand and then continue to control that joint with our right hand. But now notice it's with our hand. Why? Because we've changed that depth. We went from this close position to this further position, and therefore we can no longer get to that with our forearm, so we change over to using our hand. So let's take this into yet another situation. So what we've now done is we've now taken from a middle zone grab to a high zone grab. So that throws in some other what if for us. So could we continue to try and control this joint? Yeah, but it's really on the edge of our outer rim, so it's probably better to do yet another strategy. So in this case, what we're going to do is, yes, we're going to keep that third point pinned like we always do, and then what we want to do is we want to go directly to the body. So in this case, what we're going to do is take this middle knuckle and go to the body. So how is this different? Well, they're forcing themselves to keep that elbow extended rather than us forcing them. So it changes it a little bit. So let's show you yet another way in which we can do that exact same thing. In this case, gripping talon. So we have those 3 points like we normally do, but now what we're going to do is we're going to move to the wrist rather than trying to control that elbow. And what we're going to do here is we're going to use the pivot point of that wrist in order to force them onto their tippy toes and then control that joint. And notice how we're controlling it again, similar to the way we did the other ways. They are now extending that elbow, not us. So by pushing against this wrist and applying that wrist lock, it forces them to extend that elbow. Now, that's got us through the dimension of depth, but we've kind of ignored something up to now, the dimension of height. If you'll notice, let's go back to that original idea here, and we'll take that back into Lone Kimono. Notice what's happening here. I'm forcing them up onto their tippy toes. If we take this to Lone Kimono, same idea. Notice what's happening. They're being forced up onto their tippy toes. So what does that mean? What that means is we're compromising their stance. We're putting them in a destabilized stance, which means that we are controlling their height zone. So we've moved from controlling to just the depth zone to controlling that height zone too. But there are other ways in which we can control that height zone. So in this case, let's take it to something like a broken gift. So what we're going to do is something very similar to what we did in gripping talon. So we're going to use that left hand, and you've noticed it's very similar to snapping twig too. So we're going to use that joint, control that elbow, but not apply too much pressure to it, but use this wrist again in order to get them up onto their tippy toes. Okay? We can then do this through a different way, something like an entangled wing, where we're going at this completely different approach by now going up and down and applying that pressure onto their elbow, getting them up onto their tippy toes. Now let's look at this from a completely different way of joint manipulation. So far we've done things like the elbow and the wrist, but we can then go out onto even a further joint. In this case, we're going to go to the thumbs, and that gives us something like a cross of destruction or falling cross. Okay, so up to now we've been talking about raising this person up, but we can also do the reverse. In other words, we can bring them down. So if we go back to Lone Kimono, what we've done here is got them up, make them come down, and then take advantage of it. So the way what we did is we used that borrowed force. But we don't always have to do that. What we can do is something like a crossing talon, where we force them to get their head below their waist, which then controls that height zone again, and then take advantage of making sure that they keep their head below their waist. Now, the thing to think about here is what's going on. What we're doing is we're basically taking away their levers by maintaining our levers. Keep in mind, Kenpo is a lever-based system. So this idea is literally throughout the system. So all we've done here in these videos is show you how to take advantage of it, in this case by forcing them to bend over, by getting them up onto their tippy toes, and controlling their depth via a variety of different points on their body and a variety of different parts of our body. Hope this video helps you understand American Kenpo system just a little bit better. Thank you very much.